So I guess this is the question. If Nigeria was on the verge of going bankrupt or the economy of the country collapsing, practically collapsing with everything you've said before 2023, how then were we able to cope as a country? Because it looked like the economy was stable. I mean, you hear ordinary Nigerians say, I used to buy a bag of rice for this amount before 2023, now I'm buying it for this amount. What was masking what? What was masking all of this difficulty?
The central bank was paying an FX subsidy, and the government was also paying a PMS subsidy.
Okay.
That's what was masking it. That is the reality. I know it's very tough reality because, you know, if you go on the street and you ask Nigerians, they'll say, oh, we don't want to hear that. The important thing is that we're buying a bag of rice for 40,000. Now a bag of rice is 78,000. This is their reality.
Yes, I agree.
You know? But the truth is that the government was subsidizing it. Because if you look at development finance, the central bank practically stepped in. The 6th floor at the Central Bank of Nigeria in Abuja, they run development finance department. And they control NISA. So NISA turned from a credit guarantee institution, which is supposed to be to the private sector, to become an institution disbursing loans that could not recover. And you had non-performing loan book of nearly 80% on the book of CBN. And you know, there were trillions of naira that the CBN cannot recover today, which was funded by Ways and Means sections, violation of Section 38 of the CBN Act, that also contributed to the devaluation of naira. Because the CBN borrowed the federal government of Nigeria $53 billion between 2014 and 2022. The Central Bank of Nigeria violated Section 38, which says that the federal government can borrow 5% equivalent of its real revenues for the previous accounting year, but must retire the books before the end of that year. They call it in accounting, they call it expected credit losses for 12 months. They violated it. They rolled it over. These monies that were borrowed and printed, it was borrowed from the private sector, from the banks. It was taken from public sector CRR, and it was also printed, was not backed by any assets or reserves. And that led to the drop in the value of the naira. Because when you create money into the system that you don't have value to back, the value of the money drops. So the fact that you saw the prices stay, despite the fact that the indices pointing to very terrible economics by the previous president, you know, was because they were subsidizing FX and they were subsidizing PMS, and the government was bearing it. I would say it was taking anywhere around 65 to 70% of the budget yearly.
Okay, and that's fair enough, right? Right, because my next question would have been, you know, in a layman language, I want you to help us identify how the removal of subsidy has shaped the Nigerian economy in the last 2 years.
Well, the removal of subsidy, you know, brought, you know, the fact that the midstream sector was created, because before last year, there was no midstream sector in Nigeria. There was upstream and then there was downstream. So you had a system practically where the NNPC was running what they call direct sale, direct purchase, where they lift crude oil FOB, and then the commodity traders they gave crude oil to, based on a phantom daily consumption number that the regulator NMDPRA says we have, you know, delivers back petrol, transportation fuels back to the market that delivered at place. But there was a distortion in terms of the crude oil that they send out and then the PMS that they bring back, because no one knows the actual daily consumption of petrol in Nigeria. So you have the situation where, you know, on paper you see that vessels come into Nigeria, but in reality, the products will not land. It will not land because by law, the regulator is supposed to collect 1% as levy for every liter of petrol that is consumed in Nigeria. So the question I have is, can the regulator come out and show us accounts to back how much levy it collected on every, or no, that NMBPRA, on every liter of PMS that has landed in Nigeria between 2015 to date? Can they come out and show us the records to back it? If they can't show, then it means that there's a lot of distortion between what they claim landed in Nigeria, when you look at the motor tanker vessel report, and what actually landed. You know, and it's the government that pays, because when you give out crude oil that you're supposed to sell, you know, remit to Frontier Business Exploration Fund, return any earnings to NNPC, and then dollars that are supposed to be credited to the Consolidated Revenue Fund, given to CBN first for balance of payment, and then the Naira value credited to CRF. you short the government on monies it needs to cover its deficit financing to finance the budget, which brings us back to the fact that the president is having to send a medium-term expenditure framework to the National Assembly to show that over a 3-year period, there's a rolling debt plan to borrow $21 billion at about $7 billion per year to fund deficit financing in the budget.